So we're at the end of Perek Gimel. Um, wow, so many people tonight. Perek Gimel, halacha Yud. We left off yesterday. We were fact checking the Rambam and his description of the size of the Earth relative to the Moon, relative to the Sun, if you remember. Right? So we said that the Rambam was off on a few of his proportions, but we'll let him slide. He didn't have a Hubble telescope, right? So we're going to talk now tonight. The Rambam's going to introduce, okay, his famous four forms of matter. So this is it. If you want to know where the Rambam talks about the four forms of matter, this is exactly where he gets it from. Is the third perek, halacha chet. All right, so we're going to start off by saying, halacha yud. Bara el lamata migalgal hayareach. Okay, so remember, the earth is in the middle, and we have all these galgals that are surrounding it. And on top of the earth is the galgal of the yareach, is the moon. Okay, but the Rambam says there's something under the moon. There's a golam echad. Okay, the word golem is exactly the way we define golem, not a dummy, but it's the interpretation of the word matter. Okay, so there's matter that's located below the moon, she'eno kagolem hagalgalim, which is different than all of the matter from the rest of the galgals. Ubara arbe tzuros legolam zeh, and there are four forms, the einan kitzuras hagalgalim, and they're different, okay, than the forms of the other galgals, v'nikba kol tzura v'tzura b'miktsas golam zeh. Okay, and each of these forms has a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Okay, so basically these four forms of matter, this is the introduction to the Earth, Wind, and Fire, not the 70s R&B group who made the forms of matter famous, but the Aristotle and the Greek, the ancient Greek philosophy, that there are only four forms. Okay, we forgot the fourth one, which is water. Okay, that never made it to the group, but to the rock group, that is. But at least three of them, right? We have, and the fourth one is what the Rambam is going to call water. So these four forms of matter are present only in this space between the moon and the earth, okay? And it's different form in any other galgal. So if you go up in the Rambam's view to Saturn, these four forms cannot exist. Okay, so says the Rambam. Now we know that that's not true because we've taken, rocks and chunks of different planets, and we have asteroids, and we've seen other things exist outside of our system. But okay, Tzura Rishona Tzura Sa'esh. So first he's going to describe fire. Okay, the first tzura, which we call the first form of matter, tzuras ha'esh, nischaber b'miktsas golam zeh, v'niyeh mishnehen guf v'esh. So basically, he's going to say each of these tzuros, okay, when it became somehow connected to part of this sphere, and the sphere up on top of us, there's a connection, and in comes what we call fire. I don't know what that means, okay? And the second one, v'tzura shniya, tzura haruach, nischaber b'miktaso, v'niyeh mishneim guf haruach. The second one, which is wind, so we have fire and wind, V'tzura shlish is tzura samayim nischaber b'miktzaso v'niyeh mishnehem guf hamayim. Okay, that's water. Again, when water is somehow connected to the top and the bottom, then this is the form that emerges. The tzura revius tzuras haaretz nischaber b'miktzaso v'niyeh mishnehem guf haaretz. And the fourth one is what we call earth. Okay, so basically, these four forms of the ancient belief, which the Rambam, we all know that the Rambam is famous for holding a lot of the Aristotelian, theories of the universe, even though he has major arguments and and polemics, right? As we've seen in Mor Nevuchim, but still, these four forms actually survive today, in that earth is what we call a solid, right? Water is a liquid, and air is a gas. Okay, so what's fire? So fire is what we call today in scientific terms plasma. Okay, which is basically it's gas. Okay, that's found in like lightning, for example, and stars, and chemically speaking, as opposed to a pure gas, it has free electrons, okay, as opposed to a gas where the atoms, for example, they just move freely. That's the difference between a gas, gas, liquid, and solid, right? Solid, the atoms are tightly packed, right? Liquid, they're not as tight, so the atoms could slide past each other, right? And gas, they move all over the place. But plasma is the type of gas found only in stars, for example, and lightning. So although we know that not everything has fire and earth and water, but they represent what we know today as these forms of matter. Okay, so the Rambam continues and he says, "Nimsa lamata min harakia arba gufin muchulakin zeh lamala mizeh." So under the rakia, we have these four types that are separated, and they're in layers. Okay, v'chol echad ve'echad makif es shalamata mimenu mikol ruchosav kamo galgal. Even though, right, they're in layers, like one on top of each other, kind of like the galgals that exist in the solar system, according to the Rambam. One is basically on top, and it encompasses the next one, and that creates like a mini galgal. Okay, and haguf harisha nasamuch lagalgal hayarech huguf ha'esh. So what's on the top layer? Right, so the top layer is Eish. Lamata b'menu guf haruach, and then is wind. Lamata b'menu guf mayim. Number 3 in the line is mayim. Lamata b'menu guf haaretz. Right, the Rambam loves listing the layers. Remember he did in last chapter where he listed the layers of the rakia. He listed the layers of the malachim, who's on top, who's on bottom. Right, the Rambam likes these different, as we call these 7-layer cakes. So here we only have 4, and the lowest form is mayim. Lamata b'menu guf haaretz. That is earth. The ein beinehem makum panoi below guf klal. Right, and there's no empty space. It's tightly packed. So as soon as one layer ends, the next one begins right away. Right, and he said the same thing, if you remember, when it came to the galgalim, that there's no space, there's no void, right? It's like there's no man's land. Each is his own territory. Now, again, like I've been saying for the last week, when we started discussing, the Rambam's view of astronomy, I don't know exactly, what at least in the Rambam's world, like, we know that fire represents, like we said, a solid. But still, I don't know why they have to be separate from each other. Like you could have, for example, an ice. It goes from a solid and then it melts to a liquid, and then you boil it, it turns into a gas. So that's what we know today, but it sounds like, just very, very, what's the word? The Rambam is speaking metaphysically. So difficult. Anyways,
Maybe the
continuing
difference
on.
is
Hmm?
maybe the difference is that when there's human intervention, we're basically messing with it. But otherwise, he's saying that this is
This is
how
in a vacuum. This is like, yeah, this is unhindered. Okay, I hear you. Arba gufos ha'elu enam bali nefesh ve'enam yodim v'lo makirin. So now we're going to talk about these four forms of matter. So if you remember yesterday, in a very controversial, at least I'll call it controversial, Rambam, he said that the planets have feelings and understanding, and they have a soul, and they know what's going on. Okay, that's what the Rambam actually said yesterday. In law, in halacha tes, right? He says, Kol kochavim v'agalim kulan bali nefesh v'deya v'haskelhem v'hem chayim v'omdim. They're alive and they're breathing and they're kicking and they recognize God and they sing and they dance. Okay. Now, why I thought that was so weird is because we know the Rambam is a very big rationalist and he doesn't go into these, stories and agadatas and things that we don't understand. He explains everything very, very pashat pshad, as we say, right? And here he is saying, talking about, the planets having feelings and desires and understanding, and they dance and they sing. Very, very strange. But anyways, he's going to compare this to these four forms of matter that do not do what the planets do. These four forms of matter, Einan Bale Nefesh, they don't have a soul. The Einam Yodin, they're not, they don't know what's going on. V'lo Makirin, they don't recognize Ela Kegufin Mason. They are like dead people. All right, they have no life. They're lifeless. V'yesh lo kol echad ve'echad mehen minhag, but they all have this kind of tendency, like they all have these chemical characteristics to do what they do, right? She'enam yodo v'lo masigo ve'ene yochel l'shanoso. They're almost like programmed, right? The fire is programmed to be hot, and it can't help itself from being hot, right? That's just the way it is. It'll burn you all the time. It doesn't know what it's doing, but it doesn't have a seichel, says the Rambam. They're just literally robots that are programmed to act in a certain way. The wind is going to blow and the water is going to do what water does. These four forms of matter just stick to what they do and they don't ask questions. V'zesh Amar David. So the Rambam says, what about the pasuk we say every day? Haluas Hashem in ha'aretz taninim v'chol tehomos, right? Where we're going to basically all the halalukas that we say every day are about praising God, right? And we talk about taninim and tahomos, and we talk about eshu barag shalag v'kitor, right? That's in Kuf Mem Ches, right? The third to last halaluka that we say, where it says that everything is gonna, right, praise God, and then it talks about the fire and the snow and the ice. So it sounds like they're praising God. Now, we just said a minute ago that they don't praise, they don't know how to praise. They're not like the planets. They just stick to their own business. So the Rambam says, what pshat, if you ever, we say this for every day, for all our life, if you want to know how the Rambam explains these psukim in the Halalukas, Uber inyan hadvarim halalu b'nei adam migvurosav. The way he interprets the pasuk is that we should praise God for his gvura. Okay, for his gvura, shetiru ba'eshu ba'barad. And how do we see his gvura? God's gvura is manifested in his creations. It's not that these creations are praising God, right? The taninim, right? The sea monsters and the depths and the water and the fire and the hail and the ice, they're not praising God. We, human beings, praise God because his gevura is seen through these elements, through these forms of matter, right? Right? That we could see below the sky. whose gvura is recognizable to everyone, whether you're intelligent, whether you're not intelligent, whether you're a katan or a gadol. You have to recognize the gvura from when you see these creations. All right, we'll stop here and we'll continue the next perek. This is just the introduction. Like he says, it's funny, he says it at the end of this perek, but this is the springboard to the next perek that goes on and on and on more about these four forms of matter. Have a good Shabbos, everyone.